The broadcast echoed across the known galaxy, a chilling promise of extermination. The Valkyrie Directorate had extended a final challenge: survive 30 days on the surface of Tartarus, a planet boasting sulfuric storms, bone-crushing gravity, and apex predators that hunted by seismic vibration. The alien commanders laughed from their orbital citadels, waiting for the frail bipeds from Earth to inevitably perish. Instead, a detachment of United States Marines stepped out of their drop pods, checked their oxygen seals, and smiled. It began not with a laser barrage from the sky, but with a simple, humiliating piece of paper pushed across a polished mahogany table. The year was 2084, and the exoplanetary summit in Geneva was supposed to be humanity's triumphant induction into the broader galactic community. Instead, it was an ambush. The Valkyrie, a militant avian reptilian species whose empire spanned 3,000 star systems, did not negotiate. They dictated. Commander Vral, a towering 8-foot diplomat draped in ceremonial armor, looked down his slitted, obsidian eyes at the human delegation. Opposite him sat United States Secretary of Defense Richard Campbell, flanked by top-tier analysts from DARPA and tactical advisors from NATO. "Your species is soft," Vral hissed, the translation matrix on his collar struggling to capture the sheer contempt in his voice. "You have insulated yourselves on a pristine, watery cradle. You rely on atmospheric regulators and synthetic agriculture. The Valkyrie are born in the crucible of harsh worlds. We do not ally with the weak, we absorb them. You will become a vassal state of the Directorate, or your worlds will be sterilized." Campbell didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses, a remnant of analog tradition in a digital age, and leaned forward. "With all due respect, Commander, Earth has its own history of crucibles. We don't bow. If it's a demonstration of resilience you want, name your terms." Vral's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Tartarus. Designation X. 419. It is a class 9 death world on the edge of the Perseus Arm. Gravity is 1.8 times your Earth standard. The atmosphere is a toxic cocktail of sulfur dioxide and methane. The biosphere is aggressively predatory. We use it to execute traitors. We will permit you to send a single military detachment. If they survive 30 local rotations, roughly 34 of your days without orbital intervention, we will recognize your sovereignty. When they die, you surrender." The room erupted into panicked murmurs. The French and Chinese delegates whispered furiously to their aides, but Campbell merely looked at General Arthur Hayes of the Joint Chiefs. Hayes gave a barely perceptible nod. "Deal," Campbell said. 3 weeks later, the United States Marine Corps was mobilized. The 1st Space Marine Expeditionary Force, nicknamed the Gravediggers, was selected for the mission. They weren't just soldiers. They were a heavily augmented rapid response unit outfitted with the most advanced technology Earth could muster. Aboard the United Nations starship Nimitz 2, Captain Jonathan Hayes, the general's nephew and a veteran of the bloody Mars insurrection, stood in the armory, reviewing the manifest. Around him, 50 Marines were gearing up. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, gun oil, and tension. "Listen up, gravediggers," Captain Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the mechanical whirring of armor servos. "The birds in orbit think they've handed us a death sentence. They think because we don't have scales and we like our oxygen clean, we're gonna break. They don't know what DARPA cooked up in the basement, and they sure as hell don't know the United States Marine Corps." Beside him, Sergeant Nathan Miller, a man built like a brick wall and scarred from years of zero-G combat, chuckled. He was strapping himself into a Lockheed Martin Atlas 7 exosuit. The suit was a marvel of human engineering, developed initially for deep-sea trench construction and retrofitted for off-world combat. It featured hydraulic musculature that could punch through titanium, a closed-loop life support system, and kinetic shielding courtesy of General Dynamics. "Captain," Miller said, his voice a deep rumble, "I hear it rains acid on this rock. Does that mean we don't have to shower?" A ripple of laughter went through the squad. Morale was high, but the underlying gravity of the situation was palpable. Dr. Chloe Bennett, a combat xenobiologist attached to the unit, was less amused. She was calibrating the environmental sensors on her rig, her brow furrowed in concentration. Don't get cocky, Sergeant, Bennett warned without looking up. At 8G, a simple fall can snap your femur if your suit's dampeners fail. The sulfuric rain will eat through standard polyalloy in hours, which is why we're coated in a Teflon carbide matrix. And the local fauna, well, we don't have visual data, only thermal and seismic signatures. Whatever is down there, it's massive and it's fast. So, a target-rich environment, Corporal Jackson quipped, slapping a magazine of hypervelocity tungsten rounds into his M99 magnetic accelerator rifle. Mount up, Hayes ordered. The Marines loaded into the orbital drop pods, heavily armored tungsten darts designed to punch through the atmosphere at Mach 15. The doors sealed, plunging them into the claustrophobic red glow of the pod interiors. Drop in. 3, 2, 1. The Nimitz 2 shuddered as 50 drop pods were expelled from its underbelly, streaking toward the violent, swirling brown and yellow clouds of Tartarus. In orbit, aboard the Valkyrie dreadnought Vanguard of Oblivion, Commander Vral watched the telemetry on his holographic display. They actually dropped, Vral muttered, sipping a spiced nutrient broth. Idiots. Let us see how long their frail bones last before they crush themselves under their own weight. Re-entry was a nightmare. The Tartarus atmosphere was a tempest of supercharged storms. Lightning, tinted a sickening green by the sulfur, lashed at the dropping pods. Inside his pod, Captain Hayes gritted his teeth as the G-force indicators spiked into the red. His Lockheed exosuit injected a mild dose of adrenaline and anti-nausea agents into his bloodstream to keep him conscious. "Brace for impact!" Hayes yelled over the comms, though he knew the computer was flying the descent. The pod slammed into the surface with the force of localized meteors, kicking up geysers of acidic mud and pulverized rock. The retros fired at the absolute last microsecond, mitigating the impact just enough to prevent the Marines from being pureed inside their armor. For a moment, there was only the hissing of cooling metal and the roar of the wind outside. "Sound off," Hayes commanded. Miller, green. Jackson, green. Bennett, green. One by one, all 50 Marines checked in. No casualties on the drop. A minor miracle, or perhaps just a testament to aerospace engineering. Explosive bolts blew the hatches off the pods. The Marines stepped out into hell. Tartarus was visually oppressive. The sky was a bruised, swirling canopy of mustard yellow clouds. The landscape was jagged, comprised of jagged, obsidian-like rock formations and sprawling valleys filled with a viscous, bubbling sludge. The gravity hit them instantly. Even with the exosuits compensating, every movement felt like dragging a boulder through deep water. The ambient microphone picked up the howling wind, a sound like a dying animal crying out in the dark. "Atmospheric composition confirms orbital data," Dr. Bennett said, her voice tight over the localized tactical net. "High sulfur dioxide, methane, no breathable oxygen. Acid rain is continuous, but light. Suit integrity holding at 100%. All right, establish a perimeter," Hayes ordered, his HUD projecting a tactical grid over the barren landscape. "I want overlapping fields of fire. Engineering team, get those modular defensive barricades deployed. We need a solid LZ before we even think about anything else." The Marines moved with brutal efficiency. They had trained in high-G centrifuges in Nevada for months, but the reality was exhausting. Still, the General Dynamics automated defense turrets were unpacked and anchored into the bedrock within 20 minutes. Modular titanium carbide walls, capable of withstanding a direct hit from a tank, were locked into place, forming a hexagonal fortress around the drop zone. Up in orbit, Vral leaned closer to his monitors, his crest feathers ruffling in surprise. "They are moving. The gravity has not incapacitated them. How?" His tactical officer, a subordinate named Kale, clicked his beak. "Their outer shells, Commander. They are heavily mechanized. They are using external power to augment their physical strength." "Cheating," Vral sneered. "No matter. Let them build their little metal boxes. The noise of their construction will wake the native inhabitants. Then we will see how their machines fare against the apex." Down on the surface, The Marines were setting up the geothermal taps to provide a localized power grid when the ground began to tremble. It wasn't a localized quake. It was a rhythmic, pulsing vibration that traveled through the soles of their heavy boots. Dr. Bennett checked her seismic monitor. "Captain, I'm tracking multiple large contacts. Subterranean, moving fast toward our position. They're converging on the acoustic footprint of our construction." "Depth?" Hayes asked, raising his rifle. 30 meters and climbing. 10 meters. "Captain, they're right under." The ground, 30 yards outside the perimeter, exploded upward. A geyser of toxic mud and shattered rock rained down on the Marines' energy shields. From the crater emerged a creature that looked like it had been ripped from a primordial nightmare. It was 80 feet long, a segmented, silicon-based monstrosity that resembled a centipede crossed with a deep-sea trenchworm. Its head was a gaping maw of spinning, crystalline teeth designed to chew through solid rock. It let out a deafening screech that caused the Marines' audio dampeners to aggressively filter the noise to prevent eardrum rupture. "Contact front!" Miller roared. The tremor worm lunged forward with terrifying speed, its massive bulk defying the heavy gravity of the planet. It slammed into the northern barricade, denting the titanium carbide wall and sending 2 automated turrets flying into the mud. "Light it up!" Hayes yelled. 50 M99 magnetic accelerator rifles opened fire simultaneously. The air filled with the deafening crack of hypervelocity tungsten slugs breaking the sound barrier. The rounds, traveling at Mach 8, slammed into the creature's armored hide. Sparks flew true as the tungsten met the silicon plating. Standard ballistic weapons would have bounced off, but the DARPA-designed Railtech punched deep into the alien's flesh, detonating via hydrostatic shock. The creature shrieked, thrashing violently as blue, acidic blood sprayed across the landscape. The acid hissed as it hit the Marine's Teflon coatings, neutralizing harmlessly. "Jackson, give it the heavy stuff," Hayes ordered. Corporal Jackson hoisted an FGM-200 plasma incendiary launcher onto his shoulder. The weapon whirred, locking onto the largest thermal mass of the creature. He pulled the trigger. A streak of blinding white plasma shot across the gap, striking the tremor worm dead center. The heat of the plasma, burning at over 10,000 degrees Celsius, vaporized the silicon armor and ignited the highly volatile methane pockets within the creature's internal organs. The worm exploded in a spectacular shower of blue gore and shattered crystal. The shockwave rattled the Marines, but their exosuits absorbed the kinetic blow. Silence fell over the landing zone, save for the howling wind and the hiss of evaporating alien blood. Sergeant Miller lowered his rifle, wiping a splatter of mud off his visor. He looked at the massive crater and the burning remains of the apex predator. He keyed his comms on the open, unencrypted frequency, making sure the ship in orbit could hear him. "Command, this is Gravedigger Actual," Miller said smoothly. "Target neutralized. Tell the birds upstairs I have a question." "Pause. Is that all?" If the Valkyrie expected a swift and terrifying end to the human expedition, the destruction of the tremor worm was a brutal wake-up call. Aboard the Vanguard of Oblivion, Commander Vral slammed his clawed fist against the command console, cracking the crystalline interface. "What was that weapon?" Vral demanded, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. "That was not standard kinetic weaponry. They vaporized a silicon carapace apex predator with a single shot. Sensors indicate a localized plasma state, Commander," Kale replied, his tone laced with nervous apprehension. "They possess portable energy weapons with yields vastly exceeding our preliminary intelligence reports. The humans. They are highly militarized. They are prey pretending to be predators," Vral spat. "Let them enjoy their minor victory. Tartarus has a 90-hour day-night cycle. The sun is setting. When the temperature drops, their crude power cores will freeze, their suits will lock up, and the Night Stalkers will pick the meat from their frozen shells." Down on the surface, the sickly yellow light of the binary star system began to fade, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating darkness. With the loss of the sun, the temperature plummeted at a terrifying rate. Within an hour, it went from a balmy 40 degrees Celsius to -1 to 120. Frost, composed of frozen carbon dioxide and sulfur, began to coat the landscape, turning the jagged obsidian rocks into a glittering, deadly winterscape. Dr. Bennett monitored the telemetry from the command tent, a pressurized modular structure erected in the center of the perimeter. Captain, ambient temperature is plunging faster than the orbital data suggested. We're hitting negative 130 Celsius. If we were using standard lithium-ion or even microfission cells, we'd be experiencing power drain and localized freezing in the suit joints. Hayes walked in, his suit covered in a thin layer of alien frost that instantly melted as he entered the heated environment of the tent. "But we're not using standard cells, are we, Doc?" Bennett smiled faintly. "No. The Department of Energy was very generous. The zero-point isotope reactors in our suits generate enough ambient thermal runoff to keep the hydraulic fluid well above freezing. Furthermore, the geothermal taps we drove into the bedrock are pulling heat straight from Tartarus's mantle. We have infinite power and a stable thermal bubble of 20 degrees Celsius inside the perimeter." "Good," Hayes said, looking at the tactical map. The radar was heavily obscured by the atmospheric interference, but the seismic sensors were clear. The Valkyrie are waiting for us to freeze to death. Let's make sure we stay warm. Outside, the Marines had activated high-intensity floodlights, carving a stark, white dome of visibility out of the pitch-black alien night. Sergeant Miller was walking the perimeter, checking the fields of fire. The air was so cold that the atmospheric moisture froze and fell as a continuous glittering dust. "Stay sharp, gravediggers," Miller's voice crackled over the squad net. "Thermal imaging is going to be our best friend tonight. Anything that moves in that dark is going to light up like a Christmas tree on our HUDs." At 0200 hours, local time, the perimeter alarms began to chime. A low, rhythmic warning klaxon sounded over the comms. "Movement," Corporal Jackson reported from the eastern wall. "Lots of it. I'm getting dozens, no, hundreds of thermal pings." Hayes stepped out of the command tent, his rifle already shouldered. "Magnify!" On his HUD, the darkness was replaced by a thermal overlay. Swarming down the jagged obsidian ridges were hundreds of creatures. They were smaller than the tremor worm, perhaps the size of terrestrial lions, but they were vastly more agile. They had 6 multi-jointed legs ending in hook-like claws, and their bodies were elongated, covered in an insulating jet-black fur that blended perfectly with the darkness. The Night Stalkers. "They hunt in packs," Bennett observed over the radio, monitoring the feed. "They're cold-blooded but have an internal chemical furnace they ignite when they sprint. That's why they're lighting up the thermals." "Hold fire until they hit the 50-meter mark," Hayes ordered calmly. "Let the automated turrets take the first wave." The pack surged forward, a silent, terrifying wave of teeth and claws bounding across the frozen sludge. They moved with terrifying speed, seemingly unaffected by the 1.8 g gravity. When the Vanguard crossed the invisible 50-meter line, the General Dynamics turrets woke up. The synchronized roar of quad-barreled rotary cannons tore through the freezing night. The turrets fired depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 6,000 rounds per minute. The lead line of Night Stalkers simply disintegrated, torn to shreds in a storm of heavy ballistics. Blue blood froze almost instantly as it sprayed into the frigid air. But the pack did not retreat. They climbed over the shattered remains of their kin, pressing the assault with mindless ferocity. "Weapons free! Give them hell!" Hayes roared. The perimeter erupted in flashes of blinding light. The Marines fired in disciplined, overlapping bursts. Railgun slugs ripped through 2, sometimes 3 creatures at a time before burying themselves in the rock. Jackson was methodically lobbing high-explosive microgrenades into the densest concentrations, turning the charging beasts into craters of frozen gore. A few Night Stalkers managed to clear the kill zone, leaping incredible distances to land on the titanium barricades. One vaulted over, landing heavily inside the perimeter right next to Miller. It lunged, its jaw unhinging to reveal rows of jagged, translucent teeth, aiming straight for the sergeant's helmet. Miller didn't even raise his rifle. He stepped into the leap, driving a mechanically augmented, hydraulic-powered fist straight into the creature's chest. The impact sounded like a car crash. The exoskeleton's strength shattered the beast's ribcage, sending it flying backward over the wall, dead before it hit the ground. "Keep your spacing!" Miller shouted, racking the bolt on his rifle. "They're fast, but they're stupid!" The slaughter lasted for 45 minutes. The Marines expended thousands of rounds of ammunition, but the supply caches dropped with them were deeply stocked. Slowly, the sheer volume of casualties broke the pack's momentum. The surviving Night Stalkers, realizing that this prey was made of impenetrable metal and spat fire, turned and scattered back into the freezing dark. The floodlights illuminated a horrific landscape. The ground was littered with hundreds of alien carcasses, steaming slightly as their internal chemical furnaces cooled in the -130 air. Inside the perimeter, not a single Marine had a scratch. Hayes took a deep breath, the filtered air tasting faintly of recycled copper. He walked to the center of the camp, looking up at the sky. Through the breaks in the swirling clouds, he knew the Valkyrie ship was up there, watching in stunned silence. He keyed his transmitter to the broad-spectrum frequency. Vanguard of Oblivion, this is Captain Hayes of the United States Marine Corps. It's getting a little boring down here. If this is the best your death world has to offer, you might want to send a rescue party for the local wildlife. We're going to need more targets. The bridge of the Vanguard of Oblivion was dead silent. The holographic projection of the human encampment glowed in the center of the command deck, displaying the impossible reality, a pristine, hexagonal fortress, sitting untouched amidst a graveyard of Tartarus's deadliest nocturnal predators. Commander Vral stared at the telemetry, his mandibles twitching in a rhythmic spasm of barely contained fury. He had expected to watch the bipeds freeze, their fragile biology giving out as the localized temperature plummeted. Instead, they had built a fortress of thermal stability, utilizing isotopic decay and geothermal extraction technologies that defied Valkyrie understanding of primitive species. "Commander," Kale whispered, stepping cautiously into Vral's peripheral vision. "High Minister Vorath is demanding a status update. The High Council has been monitoring the unencrypted human broadcasts. The taunts are causing unrest among the vassal states." Vral turned, his obsidian eyes narrowing. The political implications were disastrous. The Valkyrie ruled through absolute terror and the illusion of invincibility. If the galaxy saw a single detachment of humans casually swatting away the horrors of a Class 9 death world, the resulting rebellions would tear the Directorate apart. "Tell the High Minister that the humans have simply gotten lucky with their landing zone." Vral lied, smoothing his ceremonial crest. "They landed in a valley with low seismic instability. We will correct this oversight. Initiate atmospheric seeding." Kale's feathers puffed up in alarm. "Commander, seeding the atmosphere with ion-charged particulates will trigger a Category 5 sulfuric cyclone. It is technically a violation of the trial's non-intervention clause." "Do it!" Vral roared, grabbing Kale by the collar of his uniform. "If they survive the month, we lose Earth. Worse, we lose our reputation. We will mask the seeding as a natural meteorological shift. Let us see their precious metal suits withstand a storm that can strip flesh from bone and short-circuit even military-grade electronics." Down on the surface, Day 14 was proving to be a grueling exercise in endurance. While the Marines had repelled the Night Stalkers and several other localized threats, including a pack of venomous avian raptors they affectionately dubbed murder ostriches, the constant gravity and oppressive atmosphere were taking a psychological toll. The automated defense systems required constant maintenance due to the acidic condensation, and sleep was a luxury broken by the constant howling of the alien wind. Inside the command tent, Dr. Chloe Bennett was running diagnostics on the localized weather radar, utilizing a Northrop Grumman-designed atmospheric sensor suite. The screen, usually a chaotic swirl of yellow and green topography, was suddenly dominated by a massive, deep crimson front moving in from the west. "Captain!" Bennett called out, her voice tight with urgency. "We have a massive barometric pressure drop, and I mean massive. It's localized, forming about 200 kilometers out, but it's accelerating at an unnatural rate." Captain Hayes stepped over, wiping a smear of graphite grease from his cheek. He studied the readouts. "How bad are we talking, Doc?" "Wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. The particulate density is off the charts. It's a localized supercell of ionized sulfuric acid and hypercharged dust. It's going to hit us in less than 20 minutes. Sergeant Miller, who had been field stripping his magnetic accelerator rifle, looked up. Can the barricades take it? The physical walls can, Bennett replied, typing furiously on her console. But the static charge inside the storm is astronomical. It's basically a localized EMP generator wrapped in a sandstorm. It will overload the exterior turrets, and if it shorts out our geothermal taps, we lose the thermal bubble. In this gravity, without powered suits, we're immobilized. We'd suffocate or freeze in minutes. Hayes didn't hesitate. The time for deliberation was a luxury they didn't possess. "O'Connor!" Hayes barked, turning to his communications specialist. "Get on the horn to the squad. All personnel are to pull back to the inner perimeter. Disconnect the automated turrets and bring them inside the modular HAB units. I want everything locked down, powered off, and grounded." "What about the geothermal tap, sir?" Corporal Ryan Henderson asked, looking at the massive, pulsating drill rig in the center of their camp. "We leave it running, but we disconnect the external grid. We run the suits on internal Lockheed Martin microfusion cells only. It's going to get cold, and it's going to get heavy, but if we ground the suits, the static discharge should pass right over us." The camp erupted into organized chaos. The Marines, moving with practiced precision, hauled the heavy General Dynamics turrets off their mounts, dragging them into the reinforced titanium carbide shelters. The sky above them, already a sickly yellow, began to turn a bruised, angry purple. The wind picked up, howling like a chorus of damned souls. Tiny droplets of highly concentrated acid began to pelt their armor, hissing as it met the Teflon carbide matrix. 10 minutes! Bennett shouted over the rising roar of the storm. As Henderson and Miller were securing the final structural supports on the eastern barricade, the ground gave a violent, unnatural shudder. It wasn't the rhythmic thud of a tremor worm. It was a massive, localized tectonic shift. Boom. A jagged fissure tore through the center of the camp, splitting the bedrock. The geothermal tap, their primary source of limitless power, groaned as the earth shifted beneath it. With a deafening screech of rending metal, the massive drill casing snapped, venting high-pressure steam and localized magma into the air. "The tap is down!" Henderson yelled, throwing his arms up as a shower of sparks and boiling mud rained over them. "We've lost primary grid power!" Hayes swore under his breath. The storm hadn't even hit yet, and they were already crippled. He looked up at the bruised sky, realizing with sudden clarity that the timing of the earthquake was too perfect. "The birds are cheating," Miller growled, coming to the same conclusion. "Let them," Hayes replied, his voice cold as ice. "Everyone, into the HAB units. Maglock your boots to the floor plating and power down non-essential suit functions. We ride this out in the dark." The storm hit with the kinetic force of a freight train. Inside the central HAB unit, 25 Marines were crammed shoulder to shoulder, their suits locked into standby mode to conserve the internal microfusion cells. The walls of the modular structure screamed and buckled under the sheer pressure of the 300-kilometer winds. The sound was deafening, a continuous, roaring static that vibrated right through their armor and into their bones. "Exterior temperature is -80 and dropping," Bennett reported, reading the data off a hardened military tablet. Her breath plumed in the rapidly cooling air of the shelter. "Without the geothermal tap, the HAB unit's internal heaters are dead. We're relying entirely on suit insulation." "Suit power levels?" Hayes asked over the short-range comms, as the external noise made shouting impossible. "Averaging 60%, O'Connor replied. "If we stay perfectly still and keep the servos disengaged, we can last 40 hours. But if we have to fight, or if the magnetic locks fail..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. At 1 to 8G, an unpowered Lockheed exosuit weighed over 400 pounds. If the suits died, the Marines would be trapped inside metal coffins, unable to even lift their arms before they froze to death. For 3 agonizing hours, they sat in the dark, bathed only in the dim red glow of their HUDs. The storm outside raged with relentless fury. The exterior cameras had been blinded instantly by the acidic dust, leaving them completely cut off from the outside world. Then the proximity alarms on Bennett's tablet flared to life. Beep, 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 beep. "Captain," Bennett whispered, her voice laced with sudden dread. "I've got movement. Exterior sensors are picking up massive thermal signatures moving through the storm. Through the storm? Miller scoffed. Nothing can survive out there right now. The acid would strip a tank. Unless they are native to the storm, Bennett theorized, her fingers dancing across the screen. Silicate-based biology, highly insulated. Captain, I'm reading a dozen contacts. They aren't taking shelter. They're using the cyclone as cover. They're already inside the perimeter. Before Hayes could give the order to power up, the heavy titanium door of the HAB unit buckled inward. A deafening crang echoed through the shelter. The reinforced locking mechanisms groaned, sparking as something impossibly strong began to pry the doors apart from the outside. "Power up!" Hayes roared. "Weapons hot! Mag locks off!" The hum of 50 microfusion cells spinning up simultaneously filled the room. The Marines raised their M99 magnetic accelerator rifles, training the laser sights on the buckling door. With a final, sickening screech of tearing metal, the door was ripped off its hinges and tossed into the howling maelstrom outside. Standing in the doorway was a nightmare forged in the crucible of Tartarus. It was a bipedal monstrosity, standing 10 feet tall, covered in thick, overlapping plates of natural obsidian armor. It possessed no eyes, only a smooth, domed head lined with sensory pits that glowed with a faint bioluminescent heat. Its arms ended in massive, scythe-like bone blades. The Tartaran Titan lighted up. The HAB unit turned into a blinding strobe light of muzzle flashes. The roar of the railguns was deafening in the enclosed space. Tungsten slugs, traveling at hypervelocity, slammed into the Titan's chest. But unlike the tremor worm, the Titan's armor was incredibly dense, angled to deflect kinetic impacts. The rounds sparked and ricocheted, gouging deep craters into the beast's carapace but failing to penetrate its vital organs. The creature let out a terrifying, low-frequency bellow that rattled the Marines' teeth and charged. It swung its massive scythe arm, catching Corporal Henderson squarely in the chest. The kinetic force threw Henderson across the room, smashing him into the reinforced wall. His energy shields flared brightly before collapsing, the exoskeleton absorbing the brunt of the blow. But the impact was still devastating. "Henderson is down!" O'Connor yelled, providing covering fire. "Switch to incendiary," Hayes commanded. "Aim for the sensory pits on its head. It's tracking our thermal output." Sergeant Miller didn't wait to reload. He dropped his rifle, his massive, hydraulically augmented hands reaching for the combat knife strapped to his thigh, a 2-foot blade of monomolecular high-carbon steel. With a roar that rivaled the alien beast, Miller threw himself forward. He slid under a devastating horizontal swipe of the Titan's scythe, using his momentum and the exosuit servos to drive the monomolecular blade upward, straight into the soft, unarmored joint behind the creature's knee. Blue acid hissed as the blade bit deep. The Titan shrieked, its leg buckling under its massive weight. "Jackson, now!" Miller yelled, rolling backward. Corporal Jackson stepped forward, leveling an FGM-200 plasma incendiary launcher point-blank at the staggering beast's domed head. Fwoosh! The concentrated stream of 10,000-degree plasma washed over the creature's sensory pits. The beast flailed violently, its natural armor cracking and melting under the extreme thermal shock. It crashed to the floor, thrashing in a death throw that threatened to smash the surrounding Marines, until a final, controlled burst from Hayes' rifle severed its brainstem. The HAB unit fell momentarily silent, save for the howling storm outside and the heavy breathing of the Marines. "Status on Henderson?" Hayes demanded, keeping his weapon trained on the doorway. Bennett was already kneeling next to the fallen corporal, running a medical scanner over his armor. 2 broken ribs, mild concussion, but the suit held. "He's combat effective, but he needs a shot of synthetic adrenaline." "Give it to him," Hayes said. He walked to the ruined doorway, peering out into the blinding, swirling chaos of the storm. The thermal overlay on his HUD painted a grim picture. Through the roaring, acidic dust, 11 more massive, glowing silhouettes were slowly advancing on their position. "We can't hold them in here," Hayes stated, his tactical mind calculating the geometry of the room. "The overlapping fields of fire are useless in close quarters, and their armor is too thick for standard ballistics. If they bottleneck us, they'll crush us. So, we take the fight outside, Miller grinned, pulling his combat knife from the dead Titan's leg and wiping the acid off on the beast's hide. Doc, what's the structural weakness of that armor? Hayes asked, pointing to the carcass. It's hyperdense silicate, Bennett replied rapidly. Extremely resistant to kinetic and thermal shock. But it's brittle. If you hit it with simultaneous concussive force from multiple angles, the resonant frequency will shatter the plating. Hayes turned to his squad, his face hard behind his visor. You heard the doctor. We don't shoot to kill. We shoot to break. We form a phalanx at the doorway. Jackson, you prime every high-explosive micro-grenade we have. We're going to use the storm against them. We step out into the mud, we surround them, and we blow their armor to dust. The gravediggers didn't flinch. They locked their visors, checked their ammo counters, and stepped over the corpse of the Titan, marching out into the howling abyss of the class. 9 Death World. Stepping out of the ruined HAB unit was like walking into the exhaust of a jet turbine. The Category 5 sulfuric cyclone slammed into the Marines, threatening to rip them off their feet despite the magnetic locks engaging with every heavy step they took on the titanium carbide floor plating. And the brutal one. 8G gravity, anchoring them to the mud beyond. Form up! Captain Hayes roared over the squad net, his voice cutting through the localized static interference. Tighten the circle! Interlocking fields of fire! We don't let them single anyone out! The 25 grave diggers moved as a single organism, a testament to relentless drilling and the neural-linked stabilization software provided by BAE Systems. They formed a tight, outward-facing ring in the center of the camp, their boots sinking deep into the highly acidic, freezing sludge. The howling wind whipped the toxic dust against their visors, reducing visibility to a mere 5 meters. They didn't need to see with their eyes. The thermal sensors painted the 11, approaching Tartaran Titans as massive, glowing red giants in a sea of freezing blue static. Distance, 30 meters and closing, Dr. Bennett called out from the center of the formation, keeping her medical scanner active while holding her sidearm ready. They're flanking us, moving in a coordinated pack. Jackson, get those Raytheon microgrenades ready, Hayes commanded. Wait for my mark. We need maximum concussive overlap. The ground trembled. The Titans did not run. They lumbered with terrifying, unstoppable momentum, their scythe-like bone blades dragging through the mud, kicking up geysers of acidic sludge. As they crossed the 20-meter threshold, they let out a synchronized, low-frequency roar that vibrated through the Marines' exosuits. "Mark!" Hayes yelled. Corporal Jackson and 3 other heavy weapons specialists fired their underbarrel launchers simultaneously. The high-explosive microgrenades sailed through the violent winds, their aerodynamic trajectories calculated in real time by the suit's targeting matrices to compensate for the gale force gusts. The grenades detonated in a perfect halo around the advancing pack. The explosion was blinding. The concussive shock waves intersected precisely, creating a localized pressure spike of immense magnitude. Just as Dr. Bennett had predicted, the resonant frequency of the explosions struck the hyperdense silicate armor of the Titans. A cacophony of cracking sounded over the roar of the storm. The Titans shrieked in confusion and pain as their impenetrable black carapaces spider-webbed with thousands of fractures. "Pour it on!" Sergeant Miller shouted. The phalanx opened fire. 50 M99 magnetic accelerator rifles unleashed a torrent of hypervelocity tungsten. Where the rounds had previously sparked and bounced off, they now found the microscopic fissures in the alien armor. The kinetic impact of the slugs shattered the weakened silicate plates like glass, driving deep into the soft, bioluminescent tissue beneath. The front line of Titans collapsed instantly, their massive bodies tearing apart from the inside out via hydrostatic shock. Blue acid blood sprayed into the storm, instantly freezing into deadly, razor-sharp icicles that clattered against the Marines' Teflon-coated armor. But the surviving Titans were enraged. 2 of the beasts vaulted over the corpses of their brethren, closing the gap in a single terrifying leap. One landed directly in front of Corporal O'Connor, bringing its massive scythe arm down in a lethal arc. "Brace!" O'Connor yelled, dropping to one knee and crossing his arms. The The exoskeleton's servos whined as the General Dynamics kinetic shielding flared. The scythe struck the energy barrier, shattering it instantly, and slammed into O'Connor's armored forearms. The sheer force drove the corporal into the mud, buckling the titanium plating, but the suit held. Before the Titan could raise its blade for a killing blow, Sergeant Miller was there. He didn't use a knife this time. He stepped inside the creature's guard, leveled his rifle directly beneath the beast's domed head, and emptied half a magazine on fully automatic. The creature's skull evaporated in a mist of blue fluid and shattered bone, its massive body slumping over O'Connor. "Get him up!" Hayes barked, firing controlled bursts into the remaining advancing Titans. Miller grabbed O'Connor's harness and hauled him to his feet, the hydraulic servos in his suit working overtime. The battle raged for 20 brutal, grueling minutes. The Marines exhausted their grenades, relying entirely on concentrated, overlapping railgun fire to chip away at the beast's armor. Mud, acid, and freezing rain coated their visors. Warning klaxons blared inside their helmets as suit power levels dipped dangerously low under the strain of continuous combat in the extreme cold. Finally, the last Titan, missing half its carapace and bleeding profusely from a dozen tungsten wounds, let out a pathetic, gurgling hiss and collapsed into the sludge, shaking the earth one last time. Silence fell over the tactical net, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of the Marines. "Sound off," Hayes rasped, his own suit flashing an amber warning light for internal power. One by one the gravediggers reported in, bruised, battered, with armor deeply scarred, and servos whining in protest, but not a single casualty. They had stood toe-to-toe with the apex predators of a class, 9 Deathworld in the middle of a catastrophic storm, and they had held the line. Then, something impossible happened. The wind simply stopped. The howling died away. The massive, bruising purple clouds above them began to aggressively dissipate, clearing in a perfectly circular pattern to reveal the starry expanse of space and the bright, unblinking dot of the Valkyrie dreadnought in orbit. The temperature, while still freezing, began to rapidly normalize. Dr. Bennett wiped the acidic frost from her tablet. "Captain, the barometric pressure is stabilizing artificially. The storm wasn't natural. It was a seeded particulate matrix. Someone just turned it off." Hayes looked up at the stars, his jaw clenching. Vral. He threw everything he had at us, and when it failed, he pulled the plug. High above, in the command center of the Vanguard of Oblivion, Commander Vral was hyperventilating. His slitted eyes were wide with a terror he had never known. The High Council was watching the telemetry feed. He had explicitly violated the terms of the Geneva Ultimatum by deploying a weather control weapon, a desperate, illegal gambit to wipe the humans out and hide the evidence. And they had survived. "Commander," Kale whispered, his voice trembling as he backed away from the console. "High Minister Vorath is transmitting." He is demanding your immediate surrender. The human ship, the Nimitz 2, has broadcasted your treaty violation on all galactic frequencies. The entire sector knows what you did." Vral's mind snapped. The shame of defeat was absolute, but the punishment for this failure would be a slow, agonizing execution in the sulfur pits of the homeworld. He had nothing left to lose. "Block the High Minister's transmission," Vral snarled, drawing his ceremonial plasma pistol and aiming it at Kael. "And prep my Praetorian dropship. If I am to die, I will not do it cowering in orbit. I will go down there and snap the spine of that human captain myself." Down in the mud of Tartarus, the Marines were busy reconnecting the localized power grid to a backup Lockheed Martin microfusion generator when the sky tore open again. This time, it wasn't a storm. It was a single, massive Valkyrie dropship, its hull painted in the crimson and gold of the Directorate's elite guard. It didn't bother with a stealthy descent. It slammed through the atmosphere, its retro rocket scorching the earth as it touched down less than 100 yards from the human perimeter. The ramp lowered, hitting the rocky ground with a heavy clang. Out stepped Commander Vral, encased in a towering, mechanized combat suit of dark alloy. Behind him marched 20 Praetorian guards. the deadliest warriors in the Valkyrie Empire, armed with heavy plasma casters and energy-shielded halberds. "Captain Hayes!" Vral's voice boomed across the desolate landscape, amplified by his suit's external speakers. The translation matrix rendered his alien clicks and hisses into perfect, menacing English. "Your survival ends here. The treaty is void. I will mount your skull on the prow of my ship." Inside the human perimeter, Hayes didn't panic. He slowly raised his visor, letting the freezing toxic air wash over his face for a split second before slamming it shut. A deliberate show of utter disrespect. "Sergeant Miller," Hayes said calmly over the tactical net. "Are you seeing this?" "I am, Captain," Miller replied, racking a fresh magazine of tungsten rounds into his rifle. "Looks like a target-rich environment. And this time, they don't have thick armor." "Hold your fire," Hayes commanded, a grim smile crossing his face beneath his helmet. He keyed a direct, encrypted channel to the Nimitz 2 in orbit. "Uncle Arthur, do you have a lock on the hostile dropship?" Aboard the United Nations starship Nimitz 2, General Arthur Hayes stared at the tactical holographic display. The Valkyrie dreadnought was currently paralyzed by its own High Council, its weapons systems locked down by remote override due to Vral's treason. "We have a lock, Jonathan," the general's voice crackled into Hayes' earpiece. "Targeting coordinates received. We are locked and loaded. Fire for effect." Commander Vral raised his plasma pistol, preparing to order the charge. He wanted to see the fear in the biped's eyes. He wanted them to realize that their metal suits were nothing against the raw, unfiltered might of the Valkyrie elite. He never got the chance. A streak of blinding, incandescent blue light pierced the atmosphere from the heavens. It was a kinetic strike from the Nimitz 2, a 2-ton tungsten rod dropped from low orbit, accelerated by magnetic coils to a fraction of the speed of light. It didn't hit Vral. It hit the Praetorian dropship right behind him. The resulting explosion defied description. The sheer kinetic energy vaporized the dropship instantly, creating a shockwave that kicked up a wall of superheated mud and rock. The 20 Praetorian guards, caught in the epicenter of the blast, simply ceased to exist, their energy shields instantly overwhelmed by the orbital strike. Vral, standing 50 feet from the impact zone, was caught in the secondary shockwave. His mechanized combat suit was violently thrown forward, tumbling through the acidic mud until it crashed against the human's titanium carbide barricades. The localized earthquake settled. The blinding light faded. Commander Vral groaned, his internal organs bruised, his mechanized suit sparking and utterly immobilized. He struggled to lift his head, his vision swimming. Through the settling dust and smoke, a massive, metallic figure stepped forward. Captain Hayes walked up to the downed Valkyrie commander. The heavy boots of his exoskeleton crunched against the scorched earth. He looked down at Vral, the barrel of his M99 resting casually over his shoulder. "You talked a lot of game in Geneva, Vral," Hayes said, his voice broadcast on the open, unencrypted galactic frequency for every species in the Perseus arm to hear. "You told us we were soft. You told us we needed a crucible." Hayes leaned down, the hydraulic servos of his suit whining smoothly, and grabbed the ruined collar of Vral's armor, lifting the 8-foot alien slightly out of the mud. "Well, here we are. We survived your wildlife, we survived your weather, we survived you." Hayes dropped him back into the sludge. Consider the United States Marine Corps unimpressed. 30 days later, the scene in Geneva was drastically different. The exoplanetary summit reconvened, but the mahogany table had a new seating arrangement. United States Secretary of Defense Richard Campbell sat at the head of the table. The Valkyrie delegation, led by High Minister Vorath, sat opposite him, their crest feathers flattened in a universal display of submission and deep humiliation. Commander Vral was not present. He was currently sitting in a maximum security black site operated by DARPA, providing extremely detailed schematics of Valkyrie hyperdrive technology in exchange for a climate-controlled cell. "The terms are simple, High Minister," Campbell said, his voice calm, projecting the quiet confidence of a species that had just called the galaxies bluff and won. "Earth and its colonies are sovereign. The non-aggression pact will be signed today. Furthermore, the planet designated X-419, Tartarus, is now officially claimed by the United Earth Directorate." High Minister Vorath blinked his obsidian eyes in utter confusion. You wish to claim Tartarus? But it is a Class 9 death world. It has no strategic resources, and the environment is entirely hostile to your biology. Campbell adjusted his glasses and smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. We know, Campbell replied softly, but General Hayes and the Marine Corps need a new training ground. Nevada was getting a little too easy. The broadcast of that summit rippled across the stars, fundamentally altering the galactic power dynamic overnight. The ancient, terrifying empires of the cosmos looked toward the small, blue, watery cradle of humanity, no longer seeing a fragile species ripe for conquest. Instead, they saw a race of relentless, mechanized titans who could be dropped into the deepest pits of hell, only to look up, dust themselves off, and ask for a real challenge. Humanity didn't just survive the galaxy. They conquered it, one impossible crucible at a time. The Gravediggers proved that humanity isn't just surviving the galaxy, we are built to dominate it. When the universe throws its worst nightmares at us, we don't back down. We engineer a solution and bring the fight right to their doorstep. If you loved this epic tale of human resilience, strategy, and unyielding firepower, hit that like button and share it with your fellow sci-fi fans. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another HFY adventure. What alien threat should humanity face next? Drop your ideas in the comments below.